participants today, our speakers. Thanks for introducing everybody, Colin, and for inviting us here today. So let's jump right in. The topic of today is what's next? The future of legal life and work post-pandemic. And we're trying to think about it in terms of legal operations to ensure that it's both interesting and relevant to everyone. So once I've introduced this survey set and the data, we'll then have a bit of a deep dive and a discussion about how that affects you in legal operations. Great. Just trying to get to number 2. There we go. So just to let you know a little bit of a background, we conducted an online survey. We considered the impact and challenges facing the legal industry. And we also looked at their organizations' responses to the pandemic and also the post-pandemic future of legal teams. We received about 215 responses and we took a look at those directly. And we also then interviewed about 41 respondents. In terms of the respondent profile, where were these people from? Well, they were from about 24 industries, mostly financial services, information technology and related services, and food and beverage, which was interesting. But you can see from the distribution here that there was a wide range of different people from different profile industries. So what size were these industries? The respondents represented organizations of varying size, and you can see that 16% of respondents were from organizations of more than 10,000, and we had one person from an organization of 1, and every size in between. This is an interesting question because continuity planning is one thing that many organizations completely have totally focused on. Business continuity planning is a key part of how the organization responds in the event of an emergency. Interestingly, though, 74% of organizations had a well-developed business plan, but 26% did not, which means that 26% of our respondents were in a position to have to jump through hoops and step backwards and sideways, attempting to organize their organization's responses. So let's think about then, what did people say about the procedures that they implemented? Some were very ready to implement these, and others were implementing, following a bit of a planning stage. And a lot of people, of course, were using remote communications and collaboration technologies like Slack and Zoom and WebEx, 97%. And the usual things that you know about now, curtailing or postponing travel, work from home, cancelling events, PPE, social distancing, changing working hours, counselling, quarantines, policies for paid and unpaid leave and vacation, changing facility cleaning schedules, etc. All those things you might expect. And in terms of the number of procedures implemented, it's astounding how many people actually had to implement these procedures and ultimately then how much they end up costing the organisation in terms of resources and time. So there are a number of organisations that implemented up to 11 different types of procedures. And so you can see the responses had to be quite deep and wide and immediate. So what could people have done differently? Important question to think about when you're responding to an emergency. 15% said they wanted better preparedness, others wanted better systems and communications. Interestingly, some wanted greater work and cultural flexibility, but 60% thought that they'd responded in a timely and flexible way. Some respondents felt that their organisation's responses really contained some gaps in systems, communications, work practices, and cultural flexibility. It's an interesting lesson for hopefully next time that never happens. What about budget? So what was the impact of COVID-19 on the legal budget? 36% of respondents noted no change, but for 15% of respondents, staff professional development is reduced, or there's a temporary adjustment in staff compensation, while for about 9% the budget's diverted to projects that support remote access and other work, and 8% indicated staffing changes. And let's look at this next slide, which then talks about the percentage of respondents on the impact of COVID on the legal budget. So that last slide was about the organisation. Now we're talking about the legal budget. Most respondents said that there was not much change to their legal budget, but anybody reporting a change actually said that there were frequently more decreases than increases. And in the next slide, you can see this, while the budget may have decreased, the workload has increased. Some workloads remained unchanged, but for the majority, workloads actually increased, 72% of people. And many people had significantly increased workloads over the course of time. And this slide is kind of a combination of the concept about the budget and the workload. And you look at this little red square, you can see that 70% of the respondents saw workloads increase with either no change or a decrease in their legal budgets. So we're expected to do a lot more with either the same or less than we had before. Now, in terms of the legal teams, what have the legal teams, the corporate legal and law firm teams, done? The teams working remotely for 32% of the groups, implementing work from home, legal tech solutions, reviewing the legal positions and dealing with force majeure notifications. And everyone basically is working remotely and using a whole group of different sorts of technologies. So recently, many people have, just over half, have acquired legal tech in the past 12 months. And for those people who reported acquiring legal tech, 44% acquired contract management systems, 28% acquired matter management systems, and about 27% acquired document management systems. So there's been a lot of uptake in terms of legal technologies, both recently in the past year, but also in response to the pandemic. So it's interesting to note the perception of the impact of COVID on the economy. And these legal professionals, virtually all, predicted that COVID will have a moderate term impact or a devastating and long-term impact on the economy, most hovering around this central portion of moderate to medium impact. Interesting, the pessimism, and we can discuss that as part of our discussion later. So thinking about the impact of the effect of COVID on the organisation, respondents thought COVID will have a neutral to negative impact on their respective organisations, but it's heartening to see that most people thought that their organisation was going to fare reasonably well and either have a neutral or a somewhat negative or impact, but not too devastating. And talking about reopening, processes for remote opening, continued remote work, limited travel, alternate teams on different days, avoiding group meetings, all these things you know. So the majority are really going to continue to work remotely with limited travel, alternating teams, avoiding group meetings, staggered work times when the office does reopen. And some offices will probably reopen earlier than others, of course, based on the outcome of different sorts of COVID restrictions and the current infection rates. So what's going to happen afterwards? What's the view on the continuation of remote work? Overwhelmingly, a majority of respondents believe their organisations will continue remote work even after their offices reopen. And I think a lot of people have a new view about how they're going to be working. And many people I talk to can't imagine themselves going to the office more than a couple of days a week. Some, of course, will be returning indefinitely, to the office, but a much smaller proportion than we might have predicted. A lot of people are unsure, and I think that reflects a lot of corporates have not yet made the decision about remote work and returning to work. And just as a caveat, participants today who will be discussing their organisations some organisations have not made their policies clear. So some of these opinions we'll express today are the opinions of our participants rather than their organisations. So returning to the office. Where are people up to? More than half of the respondents have begun to plan their post-COVID workplace for legal departments, but only 14% have actually executed their plans and people are returning to the office. Many people are at stage 3, planning to return, but not yet returned. Stage 2, begun planning. And stage 1, many people, of course, in the United States would still be focusing on the day-to-day operations with no plan to return rapidly. So this is a very important question for how the organisation is going to meet the changes to the economy. So these are kind of open-ended questions that we ask people. What do you think is going to happen next with regard to your organisation? And many people talked about managing costs, strategizing to adapt and capitalise, better financial hygiene, greater technology adoption. digitizing their products and their services, strategic agility and adjustments made, investigating new businesses and new ventures, getting closer to clients and scaling according to the new requirements, becoming more innovative, a leaner workforce, restructuring, optimizing office space, meeting the client's cost demands, so changing their own pricing, consolidation, change management. And it's interesting to see how many different sorts of ways businesses are going to be responding, and we'll explore that in a little bit more detail. And this is, I think, the most interesting slide of all, and this is about the people. So how will working life change, and what changes will happen, and how will working life change? And 43% of people thought that working life will change forever. And many thought there'll be a greater embrace of remote working and flexible working. And then some people thought, only 8% though, there'd be a transition somewhere between the new normal and before. And we'll go back the way it was. People thought the current change is temporary. Office space will definitely change, greater technology adoption, cultural changes, regulatory changes, and some people thought it was far too early to tell. Important to think that there's lots of different organizations and economies in the world. There's lots of different ways of approaching dealing with a problem. And I think that different people have had to respond in the ways that they felt most appropriate for them personally and their organizations and their countries. So let's now invite our invited guests to provide some of their input and their ideas, and also to talk about their own ways of how they have personally responded, how their organization has responded, and also how will work life change after the pandemic. So I'd like to introduce our speakers today: Anna Lozinski, who's General Counsel from L'Oreal; Casey Flaherty, the Director of Legal Project Management at Baker McKenzie; Mark Ross, who is the Principal at Deloitte Legal Business Services; and also like to say thanks to Colin and Legal Operators for sponsoring today. Thanks for having us, Colin. I'll ask you first, Anna. Perhaps you could talk to us a bit about what's been the impact on you personally and your business, and how did your business respond?
Thanks, Katherine. Hi, everyone. So our business is based in Victoria, which is a state of Australia, and effectively we've all been in shutdown since March. So the government just allowed up to 25% of the workforce to return as of this week. So we've been full-time virtual, at least in headquarters here in Victoria, for pretty much 8 months. And some of the states in Australia were allowed to, retail resumed possibly 2 or 3 months ago. So L'Oreal we've got 32 brands here in Australia and 20 brands in New Zealand. And I'll leave New Zealand to one side because they also had a period of shutdown. I guess the good news story for us down under is that we've actually had a really strong year in terms of business results. So we always were playing in the e-commerce space, but that really was accelerated through COVID. And we've seen business sort of up by 141% locally, just in the e-commerce space. So whilst we saw a decline in makeup use, as you can imagine, we're certainly seeing a boom in skincare. And then everyone, I think, has had a greater appreciation for their hairdresser and hair care, particularly if you tried to cut your hair yourself or cut the hair of your family. When hairdressers and salons reopened, everyone sort of had a newfound love and appreciation for how amazing their hairdresser is. So businesses really, we've really made some smart decisions around that. But the other thing I wanted to touch on is an increased focus on two things, which is communication and well-being. So we had a core group, which I was part of, where at some points we were meeting daily, 7 days a week at the beginning of the pandemic, and now that's sort of tapered off to twice a week. But it was really this core executive team, so about 4 or 5 of us, that made most of these decisions around business continuity and how we were managing things. And Communication, we had our CEO do a virtual update, sometimes weekly, sometimes fortnightly, very transparently, very open. If we didn't know something, we'd say we didn't know, but we'd try and find out to reassure staff. But we had this really sort of heightened level of communication, increased email communication as well. And then in terms of my team, you know, we were sort of having almost daily touch points, if not every second day. And that was really actually to focus on well-being rather than doing the work. So I think what the pandemic has certainly highlighted, and particularly for lawyers, is that we're not just human doings, we're human beings. And so I hope that sticks, to be honest, that kind of focus on the human element of work and work-life integration as we now know it. So in summary, I think we're really fortunate and we made some really smart plays this year as a business locally, which has put us in a really strong position to finish the year. And then I think the two really important levers were communication and well-being as a business. And in terms of technology, we were fortunate as a team to start thinking about that back in 2015. So it was a real sort of seamless transition, whilst I know some of our sister functions around the world were stressing about getting contracts signed because they didn't have electronic signing in place. So little things like that.
Thanks, Anna. How about you, Casey? Perhaps you can tell us a bit about what's been the impact on your business and how your business responded to that.
Well, I'll start with me personally, because I've actually always worked from home. And in one sense, nothing has changed, and in another sense, everything has changed, because part of the deal was I worked from home, but I was on planes all the time, which of course I'm not anymore. And so I've lost that in-person kind of rapport building that Zoom helps, and or Teams or whatever you use for video conferencing, and the adoption of that has really changed the way that we communicate across the globe. And yet I still feel that sense of loss of that in-person contact, in particular because I was quite acclimated to not having it, always working from home. But I'll say that overall we're fairly large, not as large as Deloitte, but we do have 77 offices in 46 countries. And so we've seen waves of closing and openings, with our China offices closing first, and then being reopened when the American offices and the European offices are closing. And yet, in many ways, we haven't missed a beat, and I would say that's particularly true of my team. I have 55 legal project managers who work for me in 16 cities and 13 countries across the globe. And so much of their function has always been to tie teams together. So given the footprint of the firm, one of the many areas we excel is multi-jurisdictional transactions. And the whole idea is that you are coordinating remote teams. Now, there used to be remote teams in offices, but the team in London is working with the team in Jakarta, is working with the team and in fact, you're putting together 70, 100, 120 jurisdictions in a particular deal, not only using our lawyers, but correspondent counsel. And my team has always been charged with pulling that all together, helping create a single source of truth, a single timeline, a single project plan, a single status report, global closing logistics, the how do you sign a document when people are at home or people aren't in an office. We've been dealing with that for our entire existence, and so in many ways, I don't want to say it was a seamless transition, but it was a very natural transition for the project managers. My sense from the attorney perspective is that while it was uncomfortable for many of them, they were quite used to going into an office. It was really an acceleration of trends that were already occurring. When you look at the way that the firm has approached real estate over the last many years and remodels, going to more of the open office plan and hot desking, which is designed to encourage people to not always be in the office, to come in the office when the office is conducive to collaboration, but when you need private space and solitude, to stay home. And that trend, I think, was accelerated, but wasn't started by the pandemic. And so overall, while there's certainly been hiccups and individuals who've been uncomfortable, I've been quite impressed with the way that people have transitioned, especially because for as long as I've been working from home, when you introduce yourself and they ask you what office you're from, and you say the Austin office, oh, I didn't know we had an Austin office. And I'm like, well, I am the Austin office. There were strange looks. It was so foreign to people, this idea of working remote, and yet it was almost instantaneous. Although I must say, silver lining, not that we would ever want a pandemic to happen, but it's so much better that it happened now than say 2007. Thinking back to the last recession, if the last recession hadn't been a natural event, but had been related to a virus, we would not have had the infrastructure for this. The document management systems, the communication infrastructure, any of it. And I think people would have found it much, much harder. I mean, the timing was such that so much of that infrastructure was already built. You gave the statistic about continuity plans. It's also about the infrastructure that underlies that continuity, and it simply didn't exist like it does today a decade ago. And while again the pandemic has accelerated it in terms of our use of it and the development of it, it was already in place. In fact, a lot of places it wasn't do we have a video conferencing system? It's, well, should we use WebEx or Teams or Zoom or Blue Jeans or one of the 7 others that we have? And it was actually agreeing on what platform we're going to use, as opposed to wondering whether such a platform existed and how do we get on it. So, I mean, I'm not normally the one to look at the world with rose-colored glasses, but I've actually been quite impressed. And not just with our firm. Again, we work with correspondent counsel all over the world, and obviously with clients all over the world. And I haven't seen nearly the number of hiccups I would have expected. Certainly had them here and there, but overall, the work has just kept going on, and it's more about the knock-on effects of the economic downturn and the demand shock that really has people concerned. You know, what kind? It's not that the work has disappeared, but the shape of the work has changed, and clients' needs have changed, and it's responding to that has been more of the challenge than kind of the transition to the work from home, or figuring out what comes next, which we haven't, in the sense we don't have an official policy yet, but everyone's operating assumption seems to be that it'll never quite go back to the way it was, that there will be much more remote work, but there will still be offices, and what the balance ends up being is anybody's guess.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Casey. That's really interesting. And it's very client focused too. You know, what you said is really trying to revolve around, you know, what the client's needs are, and that international connections you need to make. How about you, Mark? Maybe you could tell us a little bit from your perspective from Deloitte about the impact of the pandemic on your business and yourself, and how have you been responding?
Sure. And first of all, a number of familiar faces on the attendee list and unfamiliar faces. So I hope everybody and their families are safe and well, certainly as well as can be expected. So I joined Deloitte on January the 27th of this year. So I had 6 weeks of playing off what Casey said, what was actually new for me, because I've worked from home for the last 10 years. I had 6 weeks of dealing with the Los Angeles traffic and heading across the 101 downtown and going into a real brick and mortar office, which was something very new to me. And then the world fell off something of a cliff in the middle of March. So for the last 9 months, like everybody else, been working remotely. That, similar to Casey, that is not unusual for me. As I said, the 10 years before joining Deloitte, I worked remotely. What has been incredibly unusual, not necessarily unfortunate by any stretch, is I haven't been on a plane since the end of February. I remember when my first child was born, I think I did 330,000 miles in that first year, and I'll never forget that. So to have essentially 0 air miles from the end of February through to now that is certainly unique. And if we're talking silver linings, silver linings for me has unquestionably been the amount of time I've had to spend with my family, my wife and my kids, that have, being able to be in town for, soccer practice when soccer practice was reinstated, being able to participate in a lot more family activities than I was previously when I was on the road or in the air so much. So that's unquestionably been a silver lining for me. At an organizational level, frankly, very similar reaction and commentary to Casey and Anna. So, I won't go into, huge detail. What I will say is I've been incredibly impressed at how the leadership of the organization have been so incredibly transparent with their employees. I mean, Deloitte employs ballpark, I think, 300,000 people across the globe. And the level of transparency, communication, and video conferences from executive leadership across all of the different functions, across all of the geographies, has been nothing short of astronomical, in my opinion. I've also seen a tremendous focus, and I think, Anna, you used the words well-being. At Deloitte, we have a holistic focus on what we call empowered well-being, and that includes resilience podcasts, training, wealth of resources. That has been ramped up to an incredible extent to provide our global workforce access to the tools that they need to manage their well-being in a virtual environment. So that's been incredibly impressive and reassuring for me. And from a client lens, working with our clients to help them, respond, recover, and hopefully thrive in the years to come, coming out of the pandemic. That's really been the focus, trying to, see it through the lens of our clients. So all in all, again, to echo Casey's comments, while clearly there are some hiccups, and clearly we wish this had never happened, the way that the organization, its employees, and our clients have responded to the pandemic, has been nothing short, as I say, of astronomical.
Thanks, Mark. That's interesting. Let's sort of shift a little bit into the world of legal operations. How do you think that legal operations is going to change in the future, and what's going to be the role of legal ops? And is it going to really evolve with the advancements and new technologies? Anna, what do you think about the future of legal operations and technologies and the future?
I hope that we move faster as a profession. So my concern is that some of us have been forced out of our comfort zones, and perhaps it hasn't been our experience here on the panel that technology is just coming up as as an enabler. It sounds like from Casey and Mark's story that That was firmly always part of the strategy. So in that way, it has been seamless. But my fear is that when we come out of this and there is some semblance of normal, that old habits will flourish rather than die hard. So I think as clients, particularly me being in-house, I think people are understanding how important technology is, and perhaps it needs to take more of a centre stage. But, I was a little bit concerned by one of the survey results, Katherine, that you talked through. Innovation still sits at 3%.
Yep.
It wasn't in the top 3.
Yep.
So, to an extent, I think we need to sort of get real about that. Because, are we just entering into a second phase of talking a lot about it again, but not necessarily taking action? And I think, back to my earlier point, it's for us as clients to kind of lead that change and to demand it, and to bring it centre stage, and less of it being a behind the scenes priority or something that we know as General Counsel that we ought to be turning our mind to, but we never make time for it. So I think legal operations has got a beautiful moment to shine. But it's going to take that human action and dedication as a priority in order to see an acceleration, because we don't want to fall back and just say, oh, well, we got through 2020, that's behind us now. Let's go back to normal. Let's redefine normal. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to redefine normal and have technology as one of the top conversations when we're talking about how we solve problems and how we deliver legal services to our clients, rather than it almost be an option of last resort, or perhaps a secondary option. And I'm not saying technology is the answer to everything, by the way. You can have some no-tech, some creative and some innovative no-tech solutions as well. But I think it's, how do we cultivate this sense of, we've been forced, some of us have been forced squarely out of our comfort zones. So how do we almost maintain that level of forced growth in terms of our mindsets? That's really the question. And I think that's going to be the turning point for legal ops as to whether it can really be the main act or just a secondary act.
I think that's a really good point, Anna. Catherine, can I just jump in here? I think the ascendancy of legal operations, it's been an absolute game changer over the last 15 years for corporate legal departments. One concern that I have, and I think, Anna, you hinted at this, is that in the current economic climate, that organizations viewing legal ops as a luxury in this environment, I think, is a very short-sighted view. The volume of work continues to increase exponentially. Explosion in data increases, the complexities, rapid changes in regulation. The in-house legal team just lacks the bandwidth and some of the skill sets needed to keep a pace with those changes without legal operations as a discipline. And the legal function is being asked, these days to morph in many ways from being a cost center to a value creator. And legal operations as a discipline is inextricably linked to solving those challenges. At the same time, the ROI for legal operations and growth of legal operations programs may not be immediately obvious in a 6-12 month horizon. So, I encourage organizations to think about the medium to long-term implications, and certainly not pulling back from legal operations.
And look, we've always done it this way has forever been a vacuous statement, but it rings even more hollow today, because we've proven that we can do it other ways. That many of the we've always done it this ways we're not as sacred as we treated them, and so there is a moment to overcome a lot of the kind of inertia and initial resistance to change. But as with all change management, it will require leadership and sustained attention, and those things are in short supply. And not because we have bad leaders, but because we have leaders who have to deal with so many different things simultaneously, and keeping what is broadly termed legal operations at the forefront can be quite a challenge when there are so many other burning platforms sucking up the oxygen. But certainly, I think in the long term, there will be this impact of the recognition that things can change and can change pretty rapidly, and don't necessarily need to change in radical ways. The point I made at the beginning about this infrastructure was already in place for video conferencing. We just didn't utilize it the way we did before. We have all kinds of technologies, low tech, high tech, no tech, but different ways of working at our disposal that we've just never fully taken advantage of. And so the opportunities are there even without major investments in technology. What it really is a major investment in changing our ways of working. It's investment in process, and in getting people to behave differently. And that's much harder than tech, but also much more rewarding. So I'm hopeful, but I'm certainly not sitting here with a guarantee. It's amazing how quickly the jungle can retake the city, unless we're vigilant and diligent.
So let's talk about that change management. I think that's very interesting what Mark and Casey have said about that working towards value creation for legal ops, and about how we can determine the ROI and the growth, and also about changing people's hearts and minds as opposed to just introducing a new technology. How are we going to convince and persuade people about this, the value that legal ops creates and that this innovation and technology can provide? How can we move towards helping people to understand legal operations and the associated technologies do create value? And how do we change minds?
For me, the biggest change tends to be when you can convince general counsel, who are, and I mean the GC, not just in-house departments, but the leader of the department, that it can help them with their value storytelling. So it's not just the value you can offer them, but it's the way that they can demonstrate the value of the department, not just legal ops, of the department to their internal stakeholders. To me, that's when I've seen the most change happen the most quickly. And again, one of the things that we've seen is a newer crop of general counsel who are certainly more open to that. And so, it's change management 101. It's really boring. It starts and stops with leadership buy-in. And so that leadership from the GC's office is so important. And I saw a question in the chat of what can organizations like Clock do? I mean, spread best practices, absolutely, but the outreach to the C-suite, to the GC and beyond has been so important to spreading kind of the good news of legal ops and what it can mean, not for the law department, but for the organization, to help tackle the legal dimensions of business problems by leveraging domain expertise through process and technology. That's my gut.
Yeah, echoing Casey's comments as well. Casey, you're talking really about demonstrating the ROI to the broader business, of legal operations, some of the technologies that can be leveraged, the process re-engineering. And as many people know, I spend a lot of my time, focused specifically on, the contracting function. And again, Casey, to your point about a lot of the systems are already in place, what we're seeing in helping folks within legal operations, folks with control of the contracting function, help demonstrate ROI for further investment is, if we can help those organizations, think beyond the four corners of the contract, link the data that is contained within contracts to the data in invoicing, in finance, in CRM systems. That way, you can help the organization, monitor and realize contractual performance. You can better monitor obligations and milestones being met, that discounts, other financial incentives are being realized, that you can identify instances of revenue leakage. This is less about the implementation of magical technologies and rather about working with the systems that may already exist and linking those systems and not treating legal as operating a silo, connecting legal to finance, to procurement, and ensuring those parts of the organization talk and work together to demonstrate that ROI for investment in areas like legal operations.
Well, that's fascinating. Anna Lozinski, I know that you recently wrote an article on the integration of different legal tech systems and how they can impact the ability for the organization to demonstrate the strategic contribution. Can you talk a little bit more about your views on this exact topic?
Yeah, and I just want to build on what Casey and Mark just were saying there around ROI is definitely important. And I think that's how the business case needs to be led when you're selling it in to the C-suite or to IT or certainly to the CFO. I'm always baffled by general counsel who meet with their CFO about investing in technology, but there's not one quantitative figure in there. There's no dollars attached to any of the ROI story. And then they're bummed when they leave to say, oh, the CFO didn't buy it. So I think your data is really important. You've got to speak the language of your audience and really play into the psychology. And I think that all boils down to mindset. So, as a leader, you need to believe in this. You need to have some passion. You need to lead by example. I know I've got a small team, so I have to lead by example. I have to be using their technology. I can't delegate that to anyone else. But what I've seen, in some of the discussions I've had with general counsel that have bigger teams, I think the same applies. Yes, you may have the luxury of having a separate function, but you've really got to lead by example and show that you're also using technology. Dashboards don't happen in a vacuum. Every single lawyer needs to contribute to a dashboard or contribute to, continuous improvement of technology. So I just wanted to make that point a little bit about mindset, because I think it starts with that open-mindedness and that, again, the programming that we've all had, if technology hasn't been part of your legal upbringing, or even just obviously the iPhone only came into effect in the 2000s, so if hasn't been part of your life. But I just wanted to answer also a question in there around risk framework. So one thing that we did this year really boldly, and more boldly than we ever have before, because our workload was up by 100%. So we were seeing it was just phenomenal. We run like a Formula One race at L'Oreal anyway, but it was like running 2 Formula One races at the same time, all in lockdown, with my team scattered overseas and interstate, to support their well-being. And so what we did is we came together as a team and we were really clear on what our strategic priorities were going to be, and we really honed in and defined what risk looked like, so that we could say to the business, unless it's medium or high risk, we're basically not going to look at it. And we aligned with our exec, I aligned with my exec peers on that. And then we actually established an auto reply through our emails that was really blunt about that, saying, thanks, we're inundated. Here's how we're going to assess whether it's a priority or not. Here are your options if it's not. Thanks. A lot more gently than that, but essentially, you know, we were just really bold about it because it was just not sustainable. So we have actually, you know, taken a really more transparent, we were always kind of operating within a risk framework, but it was something we sort of kept to ourselves, and our C-suite knew about it. But we wrote to the senior leadership team, and now obviously we're communicating far more broadly about that. And I think the other thing that we've done, which has been a game changer, is we've been using Dazychain since 2018, but we publish a monthly dashboard, which I was sharing with the senior leadership group every month to say, this is how we're tracking. And I linked it back to almost saying the numbers are going up, so are our numbers going up in terms of the pandemic. So we need your help, you know, to reduce that. So we're also on a bit of a campaign of reducing numbers. So I think it's just using all these things, but communication is key. How much are we using the technology? You know, we communicate how many interactions, how many transactions occur across our tech platforms, so that again, the business knows that, oh, okay, wow, there's spikes here, or it is actually being used. So if people have got a question around the investment in technology when they're looking at the P&L, well, they can see how many transactions have occurred across the month and across the quarter and year to date. So I think there's a number of data, you know, that we all have data points, but perhaps it's just an opportunity to bring them all together and communicate more frequently and cut that data up depending on who you're talking with.
And so what are the trends for the future in terms of legal operations and technologies, and, you know, how are we all going to ride this wave? What's going to be the opportunities and the pitfalls? Casey? Mark, we want to
go? Yeah. In terms of opportunity, I think it's for legal operations to have more of a seat at the table. I mean, the history of legal ops in a lot of law departments is kind of starts out as e-billing or contract management, which is seen as something discrete and somewhat administrative. But over time, as the function has grown, you see people make their way up the chain and have a seat at the table, you know, along with the AGCs and the GC in setting their strategic direction of the department. And to the extent that can happen, and it's the right people doing it, then it's a really positive future for legal operations, because it's a very positive future for legal. That's the opportunity, but it's also the pitfall, because you do need the right people thinking the right way and doing the right things. Oftentimes you can have, just like anything else, a siloed mindset in legal ops, the same way you can have a siloed mindset in litigation, in corporate, what have you. And you need to understand how what you're doing connects to the larger legal team, and what the legal team is doing connects to the larger organization. And to the extent that the legal ops professionals don't demonstrate that flexibility in thinking and that strategic perspective, that global perspective, they will continue to be relegated to more administrative functions, and that will be, again, bad for them and bad for the industry at large.
I think, Casey, that your emphasis of the right people as we go forward can't be overstated. I think that within the legal function, within the legal operations function, you know, we're on a journey towards a much more what we call a multidisciplinary approach and a multidisciplinary talent pool. You know, the approach needs to be one that embraces process optimization, automation, alternative resource models, continuous improvement, but the talent goes far beyond just legally trained professionals. You know, the talent today and in the future needs to embrace knowledge engineers, technologists, process analysts, management consultants, I would say that, data scientists, and yes, some lawyers as well. You know, so I don't think you can overstate, Casey, your comment about the changing nature of the multidisciplinary talent that the legal function needs to embrace in the years to come.
And Anna, how about you, the future and the opportunities and pitfalls, but also there's a nice question here about bringing young people in and developing up people. How can we do that as well?
I think, you know, if you look at the top skills that the World Economic Forum's published for 2025, I think initiative actually makes that top 10 list. And I think, I don't know what happens between law school and when people become lawyers, they kind of lose that a little bit, maybe because they're trying to fit into the system and, you know, sort of, you know, assimilate. But I think if you don't, you know, be bold about that. If you can see that there's, you know, an opportunity to solve a problem using technology, you know, I try and cultivate that in my team every day. If there is a better way to do something, let's talk about it. And, you know, that's why we have a weekly team meeting and, you know, we're almost talking about these things daily. So they're very much ingrained as part of our culture. We don't accept something that's not working, or if there's a pain point, or if we're getting feedback from our stakeholders. We don't just say, oh, do you know what, we're just going to ignore that. We look at it really open-mindedly and say, right, how can we do better? How can we alleviate the friction and the pain point so that it's easier for us? But most importantly, it's got to be better for our clients. So I think, you know, my hot tip around implementing technologies, start with something that is going to make it easier and faster for the business first. So I don't particularly agree with starting with e-billing and contract management. Even if the contract management, if there's no tangible, obvious benefit for the business user, for your client, don't start with that. Start with something so that they go, wow, this has completely transformed the way I'm doing X as a BAU. And I think that really then is the game changer. And then if they love it, they'll automatically champion it. And it's so much then easier to implement other stuff. So we have strategically chosen to almost put the legal technology stuff like document management and what have you, so the things that no one would see on the outside, as last in our legal ops transformation list, because we really want to, you know, it's about the business and it's about offering a great service for our clients. So if we have to suffer a little bit, you know, we're gaining efficiencies in huge droves. So, you know, you almost need to put yourselves as lawyers last, because that's the hardest to sell in. It just makes it easier, I think. Anyway, that's been our experience. So if you're young, please don't let senior lawyers or dinosaur lawyers beat your initiative and your innovative mindset out of you. You know, keep showing up, keep trying with the ideas, and hopefully, you know, you'll get up one day. Or change organizations, quite frankly. Find a leader that is going to listen to you and that is going to think you're amazing, because I can tell you it's not hard. It's very hard to find, I call them unicorns. It is very hard to Mark's point, to find lawyers that have an open mindset. A lot of people say that they have one, but when push comes to shove, they can be sometimes the most difficult people in your change management journey, quite frankly.
Any other advice for young people? Casey, do you want to add any further advice to people who are starting out, for those who would like to rock in the world of legal ops?
Number one, don't assume because you're young, you know what you're doing with technology. Look, I created software that's in use at 85 law schools to train young lawyers on the use of Word, Excel, and PDF. So I've tested over 20,000 of them on their baseline knowledge of just basic software, and it's abysmal. And I have the data to prove it. So I know you're comfortable with technology, but that doesn't mean you're good at technology. And one thing that you need to then think about that you often don't is interoperability. You may find something that solves a particular problem, but it creates 5 others, and that is hard to wrap your head around. But you shouldn't let that dissuade you. I want to go back to the point I made earlier. You don't need new tech to work differently. And the tech tools that you already have all kinds of unexplored, useful features that can absolutely change the way that you operate, both on an individual level and on a team level. And so start there. Start with the tools that your organization already gives you, and also I can guarantee for a large percentage of you, your organization has tools that they don't give you, but will give you if you ask. And so try and make friends with IT, and figure out what's available that doesn't need to be procured, that simply needs to be turned on. Because it's sometimes it's amazing what's at your disposal that you didn't know was there, and then tinker. Tinkering is fun, and you learn so much by tinkering. Set aside time for that. If this really is a passion, it won't feel like work.
Fantastic. Well, I see that our time is nearly up. I'd like to thank Colin McCarthy and Legal Operators.
I think we may have lost you, Catherine. So Colin, I'll step in. Thank you, Colin, and Legal Operators. Catherine's frozen.
Well, everybody, I just want to thank you, panel, so much. This was such a robust conversation, covered so many great topics. The interaction's been phenomenal. Your expertise is always welcome. I hope to, come back and do something else again in 2021. I will be sharing a recording.
To thank our presenters and Lozinski.
Looks like Katherine interjected and jumped again. So I will be following up with the recording for everybody who attended today. And I want to thank all the attendees for all the great questions and keeping the discussion going. This has been phenomenal. I will follow up with Katherine afterwards and make sure everything's going smooth.
Great. Thank you, Colin. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
See you, everyone.
Bye-bye, guys. Thank you so much.